The countdown is over. Game one's coming up. Bryant on Saturday, and then Michigan right after that. So Caleb Herring is here, former UNLV football player, voice of the Barry Odom radio show, also one of the hosts of our expanded pregame show. We're going to have a 1-hour pregame show on Learfield on ESPN 1100 and 100.9 FM. So we're excited about that. We'll give you more details on that. But, we're usually very sound heavy, and that was to get you ready for the season by introducing you to a team that has 40-plus new players. But now we finally have the depth chart, and I'll say there's some things on here that I don't think are completely settled, and it's also going to change throughout the year. But, Caleb, for you, what was the biggest surprise on the depth chart? The ones and the twos are listed. Who was a pleasant surprise, on the positive side, someone you maybe didn't expect to be a one or a two?
There was a couple. I think just for starters, the offensive side of the ball kind of was, what I expected. It was a little bit, I guess we kind of saw that one coming. I think one surprise on that side, if I'm looking on the offensive side of the ball, just listed on the depth chart is where Courtney Reese is. I think I was happy to see that he's still in the mix, still in rotation, listed as number 2 in the running back room, which got a little bit more crowded with Donovan Lester and Vincent Davis transferring in. So that was good to see. A guy that has been with the program for a while. He's kind of taking his licks, with the second unit or even the third unit at times, but he's still around, and I'm excited to see what he can do with that. On the defensive side, the biggest, I think, shock to me on the roster on the 1 and 2 deep for week one, like you said, this is probably more of a working document than it is like the final roster that we're ever going to see. But at cornerback, Thomas Anderson kind of really broke into the mix late in camp, I'm assuming, because we were seeing B.J. Harris get a lot of reps at that opposite cornerback with Cam Oliver. So that was probably shock number one for me on the ones and twos that UNLV released to the media. And obviously everybody in camp earned it. And that was one of the things that Coach Odom and his staff really emphasized and really spoke to us about was they're going to get everybody ready to play. And at the end of the day, whoever's the most ready to play is going to get the nod. And for this week, the ones and twos are out. And I think that was the biggest surprise for me. If I had to pick who would be starting at corner, it wouldn't have been Thomas Anderson. And I think a lot of people are going to learn a lot about him because there's not a lot, obviously, for UNLV football fans to know yet. But you'll get to know him on Saturday, and that's exciting.
Yep. I would spin that as an absolute positive. And I've been telling everyone I can who asks me about UNLV football that this is a defensive back intensive defense they're going to play. And by the way, they listed a 4-3 on defense. There's going to be a lot of looks. Trust us. But the fact that Ricky Johnson and B.J. Harris are on the 2 line of the cornerbacks, also included in that list is Javon Grigsby, who is just with the program for like 7 weeks in from Purdue, where he did get playing time. And Jordan Morgan, because they're so deep at safety, Morgan is now on the 2 line at cornerback. I'm telling you, I cannot remember a time in the last 6 or 7 years where you were like, okay, look at the 2s at cornerback. Look at the 3s. Because there were some years where when the starters went down, and by the way, the other thing is the size. You don't have a lot of 5'8 guys, 5'9 guys in the cornerback room. And when guys would go down to the pass, you're like, oh, my God. Like, who's going to play down to the 3 level? It got really thin. And I think the other really interesting thing about the depth chart, the ones and the twos, is the fact that Odom told us classes don't matter. It's an open competition. Experience doesn't matter. If you've been here, it doesn't matter. If you're coming from the outside, it doesn't matter. And you had 4 freshmen, and I think there's more because there's been some guys who, have been working up the ladder. Also guys, getting mended from injuries. But the fact that 4 freshmen made the ones and twos, and I think they have more true freshmen who can contribute. But Austin Boyd at left guard, and I mean, he hasn't even really gotten into the weight room, and he's a guy who can probably carry over 300 pounds. The fact that Blessing at linebacker and Jet Thomas at running back both made the twos, and we knew Blessing was there because he's been working a lot with the twos, and we figured Thomas was in the mix. But on top of that, Caleb, at the Monday press conference, when Doug Brumfield and Jackson Woodard were asked about, hey, who are some guys on the roster who might surprise, who have emerged, for them to both shout out both of those guys, true freshmen, like I would hesitate in mentioning a freshman, but apparently We don't have a whole lot on it because it's really what the player said. But apparently, Jet Thomas in the scrimmages or last scrimmage must have been really good.
Yeah,
So the fact that you've got, I mentioned 3 of the freshmen, the true freshmen. Now I'm blanking on the 4th. Who was the? Cam Jenkins.
Cam Jenkins at corner or
we
at
saw
safety.
Cam Jenkins got a lot of time in that spring game. So I mean that's encouraging. And this is a much deeper team because there's a bunch of dudes we're going to mention later who are probably in the 3s and 4s who will play this year. They will play on special teams. They will play a role in the regular rotation at some point. So I think folks should be stoked at what they see with this first depth chart.
Yeah, it's like you said, there's names that you probably aren't familiar with because they're freshmen or because they're transfers, but I don't think it's for no reason. And that's like you said, it's spinning it as a positive here because I think it really is. And this is from watching the practices. The 2 and 3 deep is not like the 2 and 3 deep of old, right? It's not going to be a catastrophe if somebody goes down on the one line. And it might not even be because of an injury that one of the 3s gets into the rotation during the game. It might just be game plan situations or scenarios that this guy's skill set is a better fit, or maybe we're just going in a different direction. Maybe to deal with the injuries that just accumulate, the nicks and bruises that accumulate during the course of a season. Maybe just having a rep count. Coach Odom kind of alluded to that during the presser this week that there's going to be a rotation because that's just the way you should play. How many times have we seen UNLV because they only could go one deep at certain position groups at the end of the game or during the fourth quarter, middle of the third quarter, guys were just gassed. And I think, defensive coach kind of understands that. Like, it's like, hey, defense has got to be paid full speed. You got to have a rotation of guys that you trust to go in there and perform so that you can have a rotation. You can rest your guys during the game, and maybe not have necessarily a pitch count, but just have a rotation that's set to where guys during the game know that they're going to get some playing time. They know they're going to come in relief duty for a little bit for a stretch of games. And you can trust all those guys. And we saw that practice, the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s, multiple times. Whatever group we thought was going to be the 1s or the 3s or whatever would be on the field, and you'd be like, that's a 1 next to him. Like, are they running with the 1s today? Like, and it wasn't a drop off. Like, everybody's expected to have the same level of performance. So I think they've done a good job of building good depth, not just by adding guys like true freshmen or transfers, but developing the guys and maybe even switching guys to new positions. And Jordan Morgan's one that obviously sticks out to everybody here when they saw his name at cornerback. That's one of the things like, whoa, what happened there? Why'd he switch? I think developing his skills at a different position may have been just the best answer for him because the depth in the secondary got so much. And maybe because the scheme is different, his skill set fits a little bit differently for what they're trying to do. Who knows? And again, we talked about this with the offensive line. It may be a situation where the listed 1 and 2 deep isn't necessarily the 1 and 2 deep, right? Like the 2 safety may not be the actual 2 safety. A corner might be moved into safety. That's how interchangeable and varied this depth chart has become, just the way they've coached and developed the roster. So you may very well see a Jordan Morgan, if somebody goes down at safety, be inserted in back at safety rather than going down the depth chart there. Who knows? And I think that's a beautiful thing to have going into a season. Fans should be excited about it. Depth is not in certain position groups. Depth is not an issue. I think the secondary, we mentioned it during recruiting, the secondary was hit hard. And for good reason. It's showing up. There's guys that we're going to see play that we've never seen before. But I think that unit is going to be much improved. 6 foot across the board on the ones for the depth chart. We haven't seen that at UNLV. Like 6 feet across the board in the secondary. It's going to be problems for quarterbacks to overcome.
Yeah, the short guys are Javon Grigsby at 5'11", and then B.J. Harris, who probably plays as big as anyone in the defensive backfield. And, his debut last year with a lot of playing time was Notre Dame with gigantic receivers. He went out there and he's like, I'm getting right in your face. So he's a super confident kid. Let's talk about the offense first. So first of all, the offensive line, Jalen St. John, the Arkansas transfer at left tackle. Alani, finally a starter. And, he's a guy who's been around for a long time and weighs up there at 350, 360. Some of the biggest legs I've ever seen on a human being. He's a freaking truck. And I will tell you, Julio Garcia, who was a starter for a long time for the Rebels, going back probably 2 or 3 years, probably 2 years ago, I was asking him as a player, I was like, hey, who's the guy who's kind of behind you guys who could be the dude down the road, right? Who's the kind of that next generation who could be the really good offensive lineman? And he was like, Alani. He's like, Alani has everything from a power standpoint. He said, we've had camps come in here and like elite players come in here and no one freaking outpowers him. No one throws him around. He just said, Alani just has to be dedicated to the stuff off the field. So yeah, if I were a Rebel fan, I'd be really excited. You got a guy who's 6'3", 360, and not a fat ass. He can run, he can move. He's got pretty good experience playing special teams. I love what they have going on at center. Jack Haas, they anointed him in the spring, from Buffalo to be the guy. Graham Keating's behind him. Anthony Rosas, we'll talk about him later. He's on, technically the 4 line working up to 3. Marcus Miller, who's listed at right tackle, he's in a center rotation. Same thing. In years past, if Leaf had gone down, who's now at Arizona State, it'd be like, oh my God, who's playing center? Amani Trigg Wright, everyone raves about the guy. He is freaking money at right guard. One of the new guys emerging, Matthias Sua, who's a Gorman guy back in from Western Colorado. He's in the mix. And then Tiger Shanks, the vet at right tackle, and Miller. This is a good group. And I think, and by the way, Austin Boyd as the backup at left guard. And there's a bunch of dudes who are probably on the 3 line now who are playing in the 2s and sometimes getting a look at the 1s. So I think they're probably up to 8, 9, 10 guys that they trust if they needed to rotate, if they have injuries. That, again, is a massive positive from the past.
Yeah, and a lot of the guys are cross-trained, as the kind of the term that Coach Roden's been using all offseason, where the guys on the offensive lane aren't just left tackles, right? They can do left tackle, left guard, maybe even center. In the case of Marcus Miller, he's been getting some looks there at center. So he's not just a right tackle. They're not limited in that way to who they can insert should they need to. And that's a good thing. I think you don't want to have a single number 1 line or a single unit of 5 that can only operate if those 5 are in that specific order, right? There's got to be some variety. Variety is the spice of life, right? So that's the same thing on the O-line. Same thing in the secondary. They've kind of inserted that mentality. And we noticed, because we were out there in the early days of camp, a lot of the guys that, kind of were surprising when we saw them get in rotation with the 1s, or what we thought would be the 1s, like Matthias Sua. He was out there very early in camp, like getting his chance, getting his shot. Maybe it was just to get the work. Maybe it's just to get a new guy in there to evaluate. But I think the method to the madness kind of worked out, because now there's some more certainty in regards to who can fill what role should they need to. And I think we've covered Marcus Miller throughout the fall camp and how he kind of evolved and adapted. Amani Trigg Wright is a guy who kind of evolved and adapted. There's a couple of stories really on the Rebel offensive line of guys who really took initiative. Maybe they're holdovers from the previous coaching staff and got overlooked to whatever degree, but figured something out, something clicked. And now not only on the field are they seeing more reps, but they're also being recognized for what they've done in a leadership role with their peers. So that the team that they're recognizing. I think Doug mentioned it. Marcus Miller mentioned it, that Amani Trigg Wright is one of those guys that turned into Uncle Trig, right? Like he's one of the voices of leadership in the room. And so that's really cool. I think those kind of stories, as well as the production on the field, are really going a long way to developing and building something different from that frontline group.
Tight end room led by Shelton Zion. He's the one, a longtime veteran, and he still has upside to be a good down the field pass catcher. He's a really good blocker. Then you got giants on the line, the power guys who essentially are just small left tackles. And Kaleo Balloon guy, who is 6'6" and 260. Christian Earls is legit 6'7", if not 6'8". He's 255. He's got good hands. Behind them is a freshman in Charlie Miller, who's around 6'4", 240. And then there's another guy in Cooper Haswell, a smaller tight end, sort of in the mold of like an H-back. He looks like he can play. So they rebuilt the tight end room pretty quickly.
Yeah, they did. And I think what they will do is Shelton Zion, I think he's taken some strides in his leadership, being a senior in that room. I think he hasn't reached his full potential. I think we saw glimpses of it. And I think he's grown quite a bit. Like he's kind of stout now. He looks very aggressive, let's say, right? So he's filling out his frame well for that tight end position, but he still has some speed, some straight line speed to get it done and be a mismatch problem in the passing game. It's going to be interesting to see how they use him and if he really steps into that role as the leader. They brought in some guys, though. Obviously, Christian Earls popped off the page because of his height instantly, right? You see 6'8", and it's like, whoa, this guy's got a catch radius that's to the moon, right? So that's always good for a quarterback to have and be able to rely on, and also create mismatch in its own right. But some of the younger guys, as route runners and as receiving tight ends, I think we've seen that age doesn't matter. It's just a number. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the guys situational be involved in the passing game, maybe specific packages, but who knows? The camp was really good, and the tight end room has taken, I think, a big step forward, not just in in their leadership and their role in the team, but I think in the way they may be utilized in this system. I don't think they're going to be overlooked quite as much. I think, one, the maturation of Doug Brumfield will help that. I think just him understanding that your tight end is probably your best friend. It's one of my major points that I always emphasize, but hopefully he does realize that, and hopefully the tight ends get a better shake on the offense this year.
Reminder, it's on Wednesday. Barry Odom Radio Show will make its debut. Parkway Tavern, 215 and Flamingo will have it archived as well, so you can listen to it if you don't hear it live on ESPN Las Vegas and it's ESPN Las Vegas, 1100 and 100.9 FM. That is 6 o'clock on a Wednesday night. We will feature some clips from Doug Brumfield. I had an exclusive. He told me a lot of stuff. I'm kidding. Doug Brumfield will be featured on that show, also on Cofield and Company, and also on our expanded pregame. So it's Brumfield, then local/Hawaiian, Jaden Mayava, who came in and played for Liberty. Cam Friel, another Hawaiian, is at the 3. I don't know who the 4 and 5 is. I know Bo Edmondson and Lucas Lenoff have worked a lot, but someone asked me, made a comment they were surprised that Friel was at 3. I don't know that the gap between Mayava and Friel is gigantic. You and I have talked out at practice. I feel pretty confident if they need a backup quarterback, that even if they had to go to 3, I still think Cam Friel can play, and it's about getting his confidence back.
His delivery, his release, and the tightness of his throw, it's very compact. And when he's on, he's on. He's thrown some of the best balls that I've seen. Where's the back shoulder, some of those quick hitting routes across the middle. He's got some tight zip to his throw. And one of the things that I always look at is the quarterback's release mechanics, how long it takes for him to go from I've decided to throw to I'm in the act of throwing to the ball's out of my hand. And, the release time is kind of how it's tracked. And they actually do track it in the NFL as an advanced stat measurement, whatever the case may be. And I think Derek Carr is actually top of the list in that regard as far as how quick he gets the ball off. It's just a little tidbit that I like to watch. And Cam Friel has that. He has a really snappy release it's hard to get a beat on when he's on fire, when he's hitting. Unfortunately, it's not as consistent. He's not consistent with that method and with that urgency and with his accuracy down the field. And that's probably been the reason that he's maybe fallen or seen some decline in his minutes as far as rolling with the 1s and 2s. But just based on what I saw, I don't know that he's completely out of contention for playing time. Let's put it that way. I think the maturity that he brings, the kind of work ethic that he has, he's going to be a guy that's ready to go if his number's called, let's say. Right. And he demonstrated that. It's not easy to come off the bench when you didn't prepare as a starter. You don't, the game plan is kind of catered to the starter and what they liked and what they're good at. To come in, fresh off the bench in that situation is a tough thing to do. And he's done that before. So he's built up some trust in that regard. So he's a good backup quarterback in that sense. Mayava obviously has the potential to be the next big thing. I think he will be a more than capable successor, which would kind of be my ideal scenario. And I've mentioned this before, that you have a quarterback in Doug who's maybe 2 to 3 years more of eligibility. And then Jaden Mayava kind of develops behind him and really only gets a couple of seasons at most where he's the number one guy, right? And he developed behind a guy who was the guy and, achieved great things and led the team in a great way. And then he kind of follows that standard of excellence behind him. That would be the ideal system. And you have like a farm system at quarterback. You don't really have to worry about who the next guy is. And I see Jaden Mayava being that guy. He's still got a ways to go. He's got some growth, but he's made some plays with his arm in practice that are like, okay, what do we got here? And then every now and then he'll make a play like, okay, he's still young. He's still figuring it out. But both things are good. They're good to have, especially when you have Doug as the leader of the room, unquestioned, at least for this season.
I got a couple of Twitter questions. These two from Lead Rebel Red talking about Mayava. He said, what style of quarterback would you describe him as?
I would call him a gunslinger right now. If I had to put any kind of word on it, he's not afraid to sling it. He'll put the ball in some tight spaces. He trusts his arm. He's not afraid.
The play is never dead.
The play is never dead. It is never dead. He's looking to hit home runs, and I think maybe that may be some of the reason why Coach Marion likes him. He's not afraid to take the shots, and we've heard Coach Marion say that throughout camp. Is one of the things he's looking for out of his quarterbacks and out of his offense is to be explosive and to take the shots when they're there. Mayava is always taking the shots, there or not there. He's gonna try to make them there with his arm. He's got a talented arm, no doubt about it. He's had success at the position. and he's hungry to improve. But I would call him right now. I call him a gunslinger, an
All right.
untamed gunslinger. He's got to refine it just a bit, but don't ever be gun shy when you're around Jaden Mayava.
Is Cam Friel a fit for the new system? Is a question.
I would say he is. I think Cam Frill is sort of a social chameleon when it comes to that. An offensive chameleon. His skill set translates well. He's athletic enough to get by if he's asked to do so. He has, we said this about him even last year. He has the urgency I think required to run kind of the up tempo offenses. Where he's getting rid of the ball quick, maybe to bubble screens or whatever, what have you, whatever the offense is asking him to do. But the urgency and the kind of understanding of the RPO stuff and that goes a long way, being able to do that stuff. Now, I'm not sure if it's the best fit for him, but because he's able to adapt and his skill set so malleable, I think I used that word correctly. Don't quote me on it, but I think he's able to adjust and adapt. It might not be the best version of him, but he's more than capable of pulling off the offense.
We did a lot on the running back room, so I don't think we have to go crazy on this. We did it last week on actually just 4 days ago on that podcast. The starters listed as Donovan Lester, Courtney Reese, and Jet Thomas, the freshman, are listed as the two. Vincent Davis is absolutely part of the mix. And in describing the go-go offense, here's the thing, folks. They're going to have a lot of sets where they have two running backs on the field, and they're going to need depth. So I wouldn't be married to anything you see here because they're going to play a lot of running backs.
Yeah, running backs, it's a wild card. And we talked about this, that it might be running back by committee. So the depth chart, you could just almost throw it out the window. You're not going to have any idea who the number one guy is, who's getting the bulk of the carries. I'll be interested to see. Somebody may do this. I know the team probably will, but somebody in the stands may be tracking the total amount of carries. I would not be shocked at all if it was like dead even across the board for 4 or 5 running backs as far as the number of times they touch the football during the season. And that's just the nature of the beast. Donovan Lester obviously is getting a lot of preseason recognition. Rightfully so. He's earned it. Who he is on and off the field. He's a monster as far as his makeup, his physical makeup on the field. But everybody's going to get touches. We saw it at camp. Everybody got touches, freshman or not. Everybody's going to get an opportunity to make a play with the football. Fresh legs are going to be a priority. So I wouldn't be surprised if that depth chart is absolutely just sort of a rough copy of just generally, so you know who's there, who actually plays running back, because when the game starts, anybody could have the ball in the backfield.
And wide receiver, Seneca McKee will now be on the one line. Ricky White is back, so he's absolutely on the one line. And then the guy who looked as good as anyone in the spring, we had Cornell Ford tell the media last week, he thought coming out of the spring, Jacob DeJesus was the best player on the team. So the receivers to start are McKee, White, and DeJesus. And then the backups are guys like Landon Rogers, big fella in from Arkansas, Zyle Griffin, who's getting a second lease on life. We both like him, getting a second chance of the new coaching staff. Smaller speed guys like Connerly and Jacinto, and then D'Angelo Irvin is not there. So good, deep wide receiver core. I think there's going to be a lot of competition throughout the season. I think White and DeJesus, if they're healthy, are going to get, they're going to be in there a lot, but there's room for guys to move up the depth chart too.
There is. There's great stories in that room. I think you kind of mentioned one of those stories in Zyle Griffin kind of getting a second chance with another coaching staff. He's a guy that had a lot of potential just based on his physical attributes, what he presents. He's a bigger guy, 6'2", 200 pounds. That's, believe it or not, that's big for wide receivers. So his size actually, and especially looking him out on the field, you think he's a beast, but he's kind of developing now into a more refined receiver, and that's good. Ricky White is, I think, probably the number one guy, but there really isn't a number one guy for the offense. Another good story, Seneca McKee. He was a guy that was kind of an unknown coming into last season and earned a spot as a playmaker very quickly. The fall camp DBs last year were like saying he's a playmaker. He goes up and gets it. 50-50 balls are more often than not, they're his. And he didn't have the impact that maybe he wanted to during the season. But now another coaching staff has obviously been impressed with him and what he's able to do. And he stepped into a role as a leader in the receiver room. But I think unquestionably, Jacob DeJesus is probably the best football player on the offensive side of the ball going into the fall camp. And a lot of people have maybe caught up to him and closed the gap. But size be damned. He can play football. And I've been watching him just to see if there's situations that he puts in where his limitations with his size show up. I haven't seen it. I don't think it really matters to him. I think he's adapted well enough to his stature. He's built up strength. He has the speed. He has the quickness, and then just the football IQ to understand how to manipulate defenses, where to be, how to be on time with his routes. Little subtle things that just make you a better football player. I think he's put on display. So I'm excited to see how it comes together on Saturdays when it's live bullets trying to tackle him in space. I mean, he's going to be fun to watch. I think we've seen sneak previews of how good and explosive he can be in the spring game and throughout fall. But I want to see him when everything's, the lights are bright, and how big of his impact can be as far as changing games from wherever he is, whether it's as a receiver, in the backfield, returning kicks, wherever they decide to use him. He's a Swiss Army knife, man, and I think he'll be all over the field for UNLV.
And then you wonder how big of the scout, big a part of the scout he's going to be when people don't really have a whole lot of information on him. Small guy coming from JUCO, so I think he's going to shock a lot of people and blow up a lot of defensive game plans. So speaking of the defense, Caleb's here. It's Cofield. We're going through the depth chart. The program released the depth chart, so we're going in depth on the whole thing on Monday when we're out there for the press conference with head coach Barry Odom. The opener's coming up on September 2nd at Allegiant, 1 o'clock start. UNLVtickets.com is where you can grab the tickets. Let's go rapid fire through the defense. First impressions on the defensive line. They threw out a 4-3 alignment. We know it's a 3-3-5 defense. They're going to have a lot of different looks. The defensive line has Jalen Dixon, Tad Martinson, who's a tremendous story. Again, another lease on life, second chance guy, former walk-on, and Ricky Logo loves him. I talked to him. He's like, just consistency. You need that with certain guys. Darius Johnson has reformed his body. He was a big, strong guy last year, but he's a freaking rock now, at 6'3" and 300 pounds. And that guy fights and fights. And then the other defensive end features 3 players of different sizes and shapes and skill sets in Xavier Carter out of LSU and Georgia, not the University of Georgia, but Atlanta. Elijah Shelton down from Utah State, had a good year last year. And then Fisher Kamak, who, again, at 6'7", he can probably carry 270 pounds. So he's going to be an impact guy. And then I like the backups, too. They went out and got guys they knew to back up the guys in the middle. And Alexander Whitmore at 6'2", 280. Cooper Webb, a little bit taller, 295. So we haven't mentioned Waisali Muvesi, who's up to 325 pounds. We'll see about the health as Naki Fahina is fighting his way back. Be great to have a contribution from him. But, we're talking about 9 guys. I didn't mention Osi, who's gigantic now at 6'4" and 250 pounds. Egbase. So we're talking about 9 guys in a rotation in the 4-3 alignment with more guys behind them. Deepest defensive line in years as well.
Yeah, 100%. And quality depth as well. It's a case of, yes, bringing in guys who are capable, but then this is a misnomer, I guess, by people that for whatever reason they have to come clean house. And there's guys that are on the defensive line that developed last year, and we saw them make an impact last season. And they're now just adding to the depth of whoever was added to the roster and transfers or new guys to the program. Guys like Jalen Dixon, who really came on late last year and in some cases dominated and was a chaos creator on that front line. Darius Johnson, you talked about him. He earned his way into the rotation in the 1s and 2s last season and didn't start there, but again, earned his keep. And because of that work and that consistency, now is one of the leaders in that room. Martinson, I think, was probably the story of camp as far as where he's come in the program from being a former walk-on and really earning his keep, really developing the work ethic and the fundamentals to go along with the strength that he had. Coach Logo mentioned it when he came. He was one of the strongest guys in the weight room and always has been. He's massive. He's strong. And that's not been the problem, but it was taking that strength and applying it to the field and applying it to the techniques. Now that he's got that, he's a force to be reckoned with. And I think that's the kind of stories that, really speak to me as a former player. Is like watching not only a guy that's good and that's got it. There's some guys that just wake up and they came like this, right? And then there's guys that work at the craft. And I think that longevity to that kind of success, it really means something. And it automatically makes you a leader. Right. Tat is one of the guys that everybody has mentioned throughout camp that his story resonates and everybody appreciates it from top to bottom, coaches to players to staff members to, the academic side of the house. They all rave about how good of a person he is, how good of a teammate he is, and how his story has really come full circle. So that whole circle of the defensive line unit, whoever shakes up out there, I think has a different way of making an impact, but they're all capable of being impact players.
Tremendous stories at linebacker. And by the way, Jure Williams listed as a linebacker. The Sam, Michael Shear, the defensive coordinator, mentioned, hey, you know what, the name of that position's kind of changed over time. He's a nickelback. He's backed up by Jed Elad, who we're both excited to see because I think he's versatile. He's going to play a lot of different positions in that defensive backfield. But Jackson Woodard is a hell of a story. He's a guy who was just on the edge of playing a lot at Arkansas, preferred walk-on, comes in here. He's going basically into the role of Austin Ajike, which are really big shoes to fill on that defense. And then Marcel McDuffie is a guy who's been coming on, just about being healthy. He's a big, thick kid at 6'1" and 245. And then Blessing's one of the great stories. Hawaiian kid. I mean, just the legs on him for a kid his age. He's going to be able to, if he wants to play even heavier, he's 235 now. And also Fred Thompson is out there. And they have a couple of, intriguing guys. By the way, Jordan Eubanks, a transfer from Florida State, not in the ones or twos, but he's going to play. He'll probably get some time on special teams. It's a good linebacking core here, and I'd be excited about the depth here too. But the top players, we can rave about all of them, especially Woodard and Jure.
Yeah, Jure for sure. He made a name for himself. He was an impact player last year, kind of that utility player on defense that just played at one speed, and you love that speed as a defensive player, right? You love seeing guys on defense fly around like that. I hated him because I'm quarterback. I didn't like guys like him because they're everywhere, they're fast, they're physical, and it's like, would you just be still? But Jure is a good guy to have on the defense. And one of the things I'm just noticing, looking at the amount of underclassmen that are really filling out vital roles and key roles. And Jure's a senior. Who knows what that looks like eligibility wise with COVID year and how things have been going lately with that. But everybody else, for the most part, Marcus McDuffie, sophomore. You got Jackson Woodard, junior. You got time left. Fred Thompson is a senior as well. But then you go down the list, even to other position groups. There's guys that are underclassmen that are going to be impact players. Blessing being one of those guys. And we heard, murmurings that, they would like to keep him as a freshman and let him grow and develop. But sometimes the talent speaks, and you got to make a decision with it. He's listed there for a reason. And I trust, I'm going to say this out loud and for fans to hear and understand, it's not that I'm biased because they're playing for UNLV. If there was a glaring issue with a freshman or somebody getting playing time, I'd probably be the first person to point it out. But everybody that I see as a freshman, including Blessing listed here, is there because they earned it. And you're talking about a guy who comes into a program now in UNLV with the head coach as a former linebacker, defensive-minded head coach, Barry Odom, defensive coordinator, Shear, linebacker, played for the head coach. So understands what a linebacker is supposed to do based on what this coach expects. Played linebacker himself as well, and pretty darn good one at that. They're giving him the blessing, no pun intended, to be a 1 or 2 on the depth chart because he earned it. And he has a motor. He's got some things to learn. He's probably going to make some mistakes, but he's going to make them at full speed. He's going to make them physically, and he's going to make them fast. So the guys are earning it. And I think the depth on the defensive side, I'm excited to see the transition to what potentially could be now a defensive UNLV football team. And this linebacking core, I think, is going to have a significant role in making that happen.
A little more on the depth chart. Last position we already covered at the beginning, but I'll just mention the starters: Cam Oliver and Thomas Anderson at the cornerbacks, Jonathan Baldwin and Jackson Turner at safety. You had a conversation with Jackson Turner. I'm really looking forward to hearing that. That's going to be on the UNLV pregame show. Again, we're going an hour, so make sure you tune in to ESPN Las Vegas. That's 1100 and 100.9 FM, an hour before the games now. We're going to have a bunch of different features this week. We're going to have conversations with Jackson Woodard, Doug Brumfield, Jackson Turner. We are tracking down the Bryant head coach. Barry Odom is on the show with Russ Langer. And then we'll have a couple other things as we'll introduce some other features. So, yeah, the fact that we went through the entire depth chart and, there's 3 guys listed at certain positions. So we're talking about, 47, 48 players. And we're not going to spend 10 minutes on the most high-profile transfer, most experienced transfer, Pac-12 transfer, Jackson Turner, says a lot about what this team is now, because in the past, maybe that's what we're talking about a lot, but he's going to be good. He's going to be good, but he's surrounded by some pretty good players. But I'm really excited to see him based on his experience. I'm excited to see what Jackson Turner can bring to this defense, because have they had big, physical 6'2", 210-pound safeties in the past? Not often.
Yeah,
Not often.
that's for sure. I think the way that Coach Odom has put sort of responsibility on the position on the secondary, you need guys like that. You need guys to elevate the standard in that room, and I think that's what's happened. And there's a time where you could point to maybe one or two guys on either unit, but especially on defense, and say they're head and shoulders above the rest of the unit, right? Like that guy is the guy on defense. Nobody else is really close to him. Everybody's just trying to figure it out, make their way. And it just recent memories. Probably Noah Williams was that guy for me, where it's like in the secondary, he's the best corner. And there's not really many guys that are pushing him to do anything more than what he's doing, right? He's unquestioned the guy. I think right now, especially in the secondary, there's so many quote unquote the guys that everybody's sort of elevated that standard. You got Jonathan Baldwin back there. You got Cam Oliver in the secondary. Jackson Turner, who has a pedigree and a resume that kind of speaks for itself coming in. He's not just some guy that was on the Pac-12 roster. He made plays in the Pac-12. So he's a guy that comes in with experience, physicality, and you immediately saw that. Guys like BJ Harris, who are definitely a part of the conversation when it talks to guys that are going to get reps. Ricky Johnson, who, for all intents and purposes, before his injury last fall, when at the very first play of fall camp, essentially, when he got injured and missed so much time because of that, he was probably cornerback number 2 behind Noah Williams. All those guys now are contributing to a room much developed. Cam Oliver, I don't know if I mentioned him, but he's much improved from where he was last season. He has the natural instincts that are at corner. His physical abilities are now catching up with him. I think he's going to be one of those guys that quietly is just in the right place all the time, able to make plays, whether it's on the ball or in space, making tackles. So the unit as a whole, the standard of excellence has been elevated. It's not just one guy standing above the rest. It's every guy from a skill position standpoint, from a mentality standpoint, physicality, every metric that you can think of. I think they've elevated the standard at the position, especially in the secondary. And that is kind of an iron sharpens iron thing. You know, Jackson Turner being up there at safety, now he can look across at Jono and be like, hey, this is what we're doing. And Jono's like, okay, I got you. And then there's like a more peer type communication there where everybody expects the same level of greatness from their teammate. And they're not necessarily, let's say, covering for the rest of their team. They're just making the plays that they're supposed to make. And when you can play that way, we can play that free within a system where the guy next to you, you're not really worried about whether or not he's got his man. He's good. You're not worried about if he's going to make that tackle when his number's called to fill that gap. That's a good feeling as a unit, right? Everybody out there, I think, looking at the ones and twos, this is just me, just what I've seen. Everybody out there feels confident that the next guy can make the play. They don't always have to be the one to make it. Yep. And that's a good thing. It's a collective defensive mentality. And it works from top to bottom. Coach Odom has said this in different words about the way he teaches defense and the things he demands of his defense. They have to play as a unit. And if everybody's on the same playing field as far as their talent and their abilities, it's much easier to do that.
So to close, let's give a little commentary on how this team has been built. So first of all, I want to say a common theme throughout this fall camp of podcast, and especially on this one, has been the team looks different. The teams of the past didn't have this. So I'm not insulting anyone on past teams, because here's the deal on the past teams. What happened in the past is they were thinner. Guys played their asses off, often injured. Guys gutted it out. There were a lot of players. Like, I always admired Phillip Hill because that guy threw his body around and he was hurt all the freaking time. And, you know, it's funny, on this depth chart of the ones and twos, there are still a couple of Sanchez holdovers. Now 2 regimes later, right? There's even the influence of the Sanchez regime when it comes to players. Jeroy Williams arguably could be the best player on defense. He was essentially a connect from Jacoby Windman, who was maybe Sanchez's best recruit the entire time he was here, right? I mean, they found that guy, and he was very underrated. He's probably going to play in the NFL. The other one is, and I like all these guys, right? So, you know, we've talked about it. I like Tony Sanchez. I like Marcus Arroyo. And I'm not ripping on people discussing the depth chart, because I also, when I posted it, I was like, hey, ask some questions. Shells, who's under Rebel Hombre, said a lot of Arroyo's top-rated recruits aren't showing up on the 2 deep. I'm very surprised by that. Well, you know, it's interesting because Anthony Rosas and Nick Demetrius are still fighting now with a new coaching staff, and I still think they have a chance to be contributors. One, I would say this is why ratings don't mean that much. They just don't. Two, because I saw another comment. Let me see if I can find it. Another person said, Mike Cooper said, well, Arroyo's top-rated recruits aren't showing up on the 2 deep. Mike Cooper said because his recruits weren't that good. Folks, I'm counting 24 Arroyo recruits, 24 Marcus Arroyo recruits who are in the 1s and 2s. And brilliant job by Barry Odom and company turning over the roster. But they chose to keep a lot of guys. And by the way, players kept it together, right? Because there was an initial rush. And I should mention Arroyo recruits include Kyle Williams at Washington State, Lee Fontenot at Arizona State, Noel Williams at Cal, Noah McKinney at Oklahoma State. Those 4 guys are pretty good, right? But on the roster, let's look at the offense real quick for Arroyo guys. And again, I think what Odom, first of all, they had to use judgment to keep these guys around because they a lot of guys left after the spring. Some guys are, there could be some exits here, in the last couple of days. Arroyo recruits include Anton Ambule, who I think is going to be, potentially a future starting tackle. Graham Keating, who's one of the centers in the mix. Marcus Miller, who has emerged now as a contributor. Balloon guy, right? Mayava. Brumfield really was, even though he was a Sanchez guy, Arroyo could have told him buzz off, right? He didn't have to take him. Same thing with Lonnie McAley. They took him. That was a Sanchez commit. Beyond that, and by the way, I didn't mention Courtney Reese as a Sanchez guy. Beyond that, Seneca McKee was like this crazy find from a school I've never heard of in South Carolina. Ricky White is one of his recruits. You see what I'm getting at? Zyle Griffin. So just on offense, and there's more defensive guys that were Arroyo recruits. Here's the thing, and we talked about this a lot. When you do what Deion Sanders did, and you just look at a team and you go, hey, they weren't winning, everyone's gone. That is so short-sighted and so stupid and so immature. You have to have layers. You have to have experienced players. You can't make up for, even if you bring in veterans who've played other places, you can't make up for that experience. And again, do you want to go down the defense and talk about, some of the best players and some of the twitchiest guys, Jalen Dixon was so undersized his freshman year. That crew brought him in. He is freaking good. He's really good. Darius Johnson was a get. Obviously, Jure, McDuffie, Blessing was an Arroyo recruit. Smart move by this staff to keep him around. Cam Oliver, BJ Harris, Jordan Morgan, Jonathan Baldwin, Trent Holloway. There's a lot of guys. And again, this isn't like, hey, the last crew should have been, retained. But there's never a team that can be built. If Deion, I'll be shocked if Deion can turn over 60 plus players and have a whole group of transfers and win. I'll be shocked by it. I love what these guys put together, but there was a base coming in with some good players. And now this staff's job is to recognize some players who maybe weren't doing real well, advance them, and then the top level players, get them to another level.
Yeah, essentially what you're getting at is the cupboard wasn't empty when Odom got here. And it takes, a shot to your ego to realize that as a coach. I think that's kind of the mentality. It's not about look what I did when you're talking about building a program. Sometimes the stones that were laid before you are good stones to step on. And there's, like you said, plenty of those stones. Elijah Shelton's another one that just comes to mind. The kind of season he had under Arroyo. He's another guy. He's going to be an impact player again. He's made his way to the 1s and 2s. So the idea from a fan perspective that just because Arroyo got fired or just because he didn't win for whatever the reason is, that we all of a sudden had to hate him and just abort everything he ever tried to do, that's just the wrong way to look at building program success. And you can say that from every past or previous coach. Like them or not, the building blocks, some of them were right. Some of them they got right. And there's plenty of names on this list that Coach Arroyo got right. And Coach Odom, to his credit, and like I said, this is not, saying one coach is better than the other. It's both coaches, I think, have an understanding, if you ask them, of their role in the program, building a program. Coach Odom will probably be the first to tell you that that's one of the first things you do when you take the job. You look at what you got and you say, yeah, this is good. I can do this. I can work with him. Yeah, there's things you're going to want to change. You're going to tweak for your personnel and your plan, but you have to be able to adapt that plan to what you have at your
Yeah,
disposal. And there was clearly enough there to one say that's a good job worth taking to pull me from, Arkansas and that I'm sure was a cozy gig for him to be a defensive coordinator there, to pull him to want to try head coaching again. It was good enough to do that. Then right when he touched down, Doug Brumfield, let's just say, was identified as one of the most valuable pieces he had. And that's not like saying, "Oh, I got my quarterback. I'm bringing Louis with me." Shout out to Dion for that one, right? It's like that's not the mentality, and that's kind of an arrogant approach to saying, "I'm going to fix it. I'm the only one who can. Everything you did before me doesn't matter. I'm here now." That's not the way to build a program.
right.
Traditionally, you can't do that. That's not how you're going to do it. So kudos to Odom and his staff for
Yep.
realizing the talent, maybe uncovering some of the hidden talent, some of the guys that maybe were overlooked for whatever reason, maybe
Yeah.
didn't fit the previous system as well, but now found a perfect match here. Maybe just tweaking guys' position groups a little bit, just making them play out of their traditional position. Who knows? Maybe like certain moves, like the move for Jordan Morgan playing now at cornerback, maybe that helps elevate his career to another level. Who knows? Maybe he's more suited for that role at his size and at his God-given ability. Who knows? But they've seen something in the players here. Some of the players that were here under Arroyo are getting a second chance. They're getting a revitalized career. Marcus Miller told a good story about that during fall camp of how he approached the new coaching staff. But I think everybody, fans and all, should be optimistic about what these new coaches are doing, but not dismissive about what previous coaches have done to elevate the program to where it is. Going
Yep.
back to Sanchez, going back to hell, even going back to Bobby Houck and what he was able to achieve. If you don't continue from the progress, it's a relay race. Somebody hands the baton off, whether they get fired or whatever the case may be, part ways for whatever reason. They hand the baton off. Now the next guy's leg of the race starts. And I think that's where we were with Coach Arroyo and his termination and where things ended with him. Fell short of the bowl game, right? That was the expectation. Fell short. But instead of throwing the baton back to the start line, you hand it off to Coach Odom. And hopefully he's close to the finish and he can give the program the final jolt that it needs to, along with his staff, to get them to where they want to be. And that's the ultimate goal, building a program the right way.
Hear a lot more about this and the upcoming season and the scout on Bryant on the Barry Odom radio show. Weekly, Wednesdays, Parkway Tavern, 2:15, and Flamingo on ESPN Las Vegas, 6 o'clock. That goes down every Wednesday. $2 Miller Lights when you come out to the show. I like that. And then kickoff for game 1 of 12 at Allegiant. Bryant is in town. You can get your tickets at UNLVtickets.com. I had a lot more I was going to say about that coaching changeover thing and that I admire Odom for not having the attitude of, my guys and the old guys. And, I think they've done a great job mixing this roster. And I think it's going to lead to good success and a good jumping off point from a 5-7 season to something much better. So